Bishop is a trailblazer in recruitment and executive search with over 2 decades of experience placing senior leaders and board members in some of the world's most influential organizations. Starting her career in nursing, Gail quickly discovered her passion for connecting people, but her work goes far beyond filling roles, challenging biases, and building pathways for underrepresented talent to thrive in leadership. Today, Gail is a true champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, driving efforts to place more women in leadership roles. In this episode, she shares her personal reflections on navigating a non-linear career, the art of building trust at the board level, and why taking a chance on unconventional candidates can be a game changer. So if you've ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes of a recruitment company, or how to make your workplace more inclusive, then this episode is for you.
Some of the conversations I had with these women was, they were saying to me, Gail, I didn't think I'd ever do anything more than go back into a receptionist role, because this one particular lady we hired was a senior person within one of the banks, investment bank actually. And that was her feeling. She's been putting her CV out. Nobody was talking to her because of this 12-year gap. And we found a way to help coach and navigate them back into the workplace and quickly assimilate their professional skills again.
Gail, hello, good afternoon. How are you?
Hristina? I'm very well. How are you doing?
Very well, very excited. It's a very hot summer day in London, even though we might be releasing this later. So for anyone listening, we're recording this in the midst of the heat of July in London, believe it or not. And so certainly a good day to be talking about recruitment in general, women in boards, and all these topics that I know our listeners really, really care about. But I wanted to start with just a little introduction in your own words, Gail, summarizing your experience and what you're doing at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Yeah, my career journey, effectively, I started doing nursing, quickly discovered sort of HR, and that began sort of over probably 2 decades ago now, which is crazy to think. And I kind of landed up in recruitment because I quickly discovered that I really liked the idea, and I was kind of passionate for being able to find the right talent to match particular roles to help move businesses forward. And I guess if you talk about purpose, for me, that it really fed what I like as part of my purpose, is being able to help people, but also help organizations. And over the years, I've had the privilege of being able to work for various organizations, including EY. I worked for a couple of executive search businesses, but effectively, my role is to focus on finding top-tier talent for senior and executive roles. And it's been incredibly rewarding just to see the impact that the right leadership can make to an organization. So that's where I'm at currently.
Yeah. So how, and I think maybe for my benefit, but also for our listeners as well, what's the difference then between being a recruiter and then someone who focuses on executive advisory? And what's the difference maybe even in the skill set of the people who take these different roles?
So you often make the distinction around sort of the exec piece is very much an advisory role as well as sort of finding the talent. So one understands the direction of travel for the business. One understands what's driving and motivating the strategy of the business. And you are able to have those more in-depth conversations about what the business is looking to achieve by way of getting in senior hires. What I've found, because I've done both, and I sort of started my career at the lower end of recruitment, doing more generalist recruitment, and that is often more sort of just finding someone to fill a job spec, and you don't necessarily engage with what the board agenda is. Yeah.
Yes, it's kind of filling the gaps and filling you look at the specification, you look at the pool, and you
match them. Absolutely.
In an ideal world, and I'm sure for anyone who's been on either side of the process, they've had their own experiences with that, and I guess that's quite common to start that way. But what I liked about you is that you actually said in the beginning that you probably stayed in this industry because right from the outset you felt that you wanted to be in a role where you wanted to help people. And you were not just people oriented, but I suppose part of the fulfillment that you would get in that role is when you help somebody with their career goals.
Yeah. I think the purpose piece that I mentioned for me is important because you get up in the morning and it's all very well sort of doing a job, but for me it's more about the personal satisfaction. Often the people I talk to aren't looking for jobs. They don't really know what opportunities exist, and that is part of the excitement, being able to unpack for them the possibilities of what a potential new role, building a proposition that could be truly interesting for them and take them from where they are to something better. And I find that really, really rewarding.
There's a bit of perhaps education and coaching around it as well with clients. But it's interesting because usually when I have guests on the show and how the whole idea started was around women changing their careers and evolving. And part of the reason why I think we call it this mid-career change is because that's probably around the time when you realize that maybe what you started doing, or maybe even who you were when you started in your 20s, you're not that person anymore and the job doesn't fit, or maybe your ambitions and aspirations have changed, or maybe you're just not getting that fulfillment that you talked about. So usually we focus on women who found ways to re-engineer and find new roles. But here you are actually on the other side, helping not just women, but people in general find that role.
Yeah. I just sparked a thought as you said that. So it reminded me of the program I ran, which was basically finding the opportunity to bring women back into work after a career break. And I ran that successfully with one of the organizations I worked with. And we were basically taking people who'd had a break of 2 years or more, and actually some of the people we hired had a break of 12 years. Now you think if you've been 12 years out of work, some of the conversations I had with these women was they were saying to me, Gail, I didn't think I'd ever do anything more than go back into a receptionist role, because this one particular lady we hired, she was a senior person within one of the banks, investment bank actually, and that was her feeling. She's been putting her CV out. Nobody was talking to her because of this 12-year gap. And we found a way to help coach and navigate them back into the workplace, and quickly assimilate their professional skills again. It was very successful, and again, really rewarding to be able to step in and sort of facilitate that process on behalf of that group of women. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that that's a topic that comes up a lot whenever I go to mid-career events, which is usually around the age when women start having families, and that becomes the reality. So how does one, I mean, if someone's listening and they're thinking, oh, maybe I should be thinking about going back to work, but they're a little bit discouraged by the lack of response that they're getting, especially currently with the job situation that we're in. It's quite tough even for people who've not been out of the market. What would you advise them to do, or how should they be thinking about this?
A couple of things. So when we started the program, which was back in 2016-17, we were in the UK, probably one of the first 3 or 4 organizations to do it. And now there are so many returner programs available, and they run, in various shapes and forms. But it's definitely, there's been a big uptick in organizations looking at this talent pool specifically. The second thing I'd say is, as an applicant or candidate in the process, don't be shy to absolutely provide as much information about your career break. Some people try and hide it, but what we certainly found is, even though the individual might have been the treasurer at the school or helping their elderly parents with their financial aspects of running their own lives and taking time out to do that, those skills actually are very transferable. So I would definitely make sure that those are incorporated as part of the discussion when you're entering interviews and conversations with organizations. It can be value adding 100%. And rest assured that what we saw was within 3 or 4 months, the value adding back into a business. I had a comment from one of the hiring managers, and he said, Gail, I can't believe how quickly this individual was able to get back in, talk to clients, be additive to the team. and was a real asset to the growth of that particular team.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a little bit of education again on both sides, with employers starting to realize that they're not wasting their time and they're not doing this just as out of charity or because you told them it would be nice to have a brochure that says that they do this program.
Indeed,
which I'm sure is something that you've come across in your practice as well with organizations. And I think that kind of also gives us a little glimpse into some of the gaps in the female talent market that you've observed is an area of particular focus and passion for you.
It is 100%. So my passion for DE, now maybe I'll start there, was born effectively, and why it matters so much to me sort of years back. It's always been close to my heart, but growing up in South Africa, during a time of significant social change, I saw firsthand how critical it is that environments are created where people feel valued and included. And in my professional life, I've seen how diverse teams can drive, can innovate, can be creative, and ultimately help with better decision making. I don't think DE&I is only a moral imperative. It's also a business necessity. And companies that embrace diversity are better positioned at the end of the day to understand their customers, to attract top talent. So there's certainly, despite progress with regards to female talent in the market, we definitely still see gaps, particularly at the executive level. The one key issue is the building of the pipeline. So ensuring that we have enough women who are coming through the ranks and who are available and are poised to move up into senior positions. So that's one of the first things. Another persistent problem is both conscious and unconscious bias. And I'm sure it's nothing new to your listeners at all, but this can certainly hinder women's advancement. It's a good idea to have mentoring and mentorship programs. It's a good idea to have targeted development initiatives and policies that support things like work-life balance. It was interesting. I saw a statistic the other day that in the investment market, that only 12% of the world's money is managed by women. And actually, Fidelity did a bit of recent research to say that if women are the fund managers, that actually they outperform men by 40 basis points, or sort of 0.4%, would suggest it's a good idea to, it would have positive outcomes if we had more women managing money. So that was just a particular gap that I have identified.
Again, I think from the conversations that I've had with women on this show and generally in the industry, I always get the impression that people sometimes say, oh, it's because she chose to be a full-time mom and she didn't come back. But I wonder if we're not a little bit too quick perhaps to just brush it under the carpet and assume that that's the reason why the woman didn't come back. When I think there might be other reasons, such as the schedule didn't work, the kind of nature of the office. It's just sometimes difficult to balance these family responsibilities, whether they involve children or somebody else to look after. The sort of schedule that I suppose was built. I'm not an expert, but I have a feeling that concept was born probably in the middle of the last century, and it was at a time when only men were in the workforce.
Absolutely. The other thing that we've seen, so the point about promoting women into more senior leadership positions internally is inherently what I have seen with organizations I've worked with, but also I'm hearing with clients, is that women aren't necessarily given the opportunity to work on the big deals, the big clients. So when it comes to evaluating promotion opportunities, it's clear that the men have had a bit of a step up with regards to having access to bigger clients, bigger revenue streams, bigger exposure, and therefore the playing fields aren't necessarily, and it may be for the very reasons that you've identified around things like being away from the office for childcare reasons, etc. So that needs to level up, or we need to recognize that some investment should be made as far as that, and recognizing that it's not because of lack of ability, but it's just because of practicality reasons.
And two of the most common pushbacks that I get from both men and women when I speak to them about this issue is usually the men will say, even if they're generally supportive or seeing themselves as allies, oh, but Yeah, but why? We should just hire the best candidate. Why should we focus on women?
Mhm.
It seems a bit on their side unfair if at some point you start prioritizing hiring women because they feel left out a little bit, or they say,
Mm,
well, that's not fair then because why should we hire the just because? But then equally, I hear from other women saying, the ones who probably have made it actually and have quite senior roles, saying, well, I made it, therefore so should you. And I made it at the time when, I only got 2 weeks off from maternity leave and,
mm,
and you asking me here to be out for 6 months. And I've just heard so many of these anecdotes. I was literally having lunch with a friend the other day who shared some horror stories of people telling her to figure it out herself because her boss did it herself. So what do you
mm,
say when you're faced
mm.
with that? Probably on both sides, from both candidates, but also people that effectively pay you to do the recruitment for them.
It's interesting, and I've definitely seen this where there are women who have learned to be more aggressive because naturally, I think men will take opportunities. So, we know that, for example, a woman isn't going to apply for a role unless they probably tick all of the boxes. I don't like that phrase, but it sort of outlines what I mean. But men will put up their hand if they think, or they can do one or two of those things, and
So
that's
that's not a myth. It is actually true because I've
yeah,
heard that, but I always thought
yeah,
it's just one of these myths. Yeah.
no, because I've definitely had conversations with some of the female candidates that I have, placed and talked to as part of the recruitment process, where they think, "Oh, I didn't think I could apply for that because I couldn't do X, Y, and Z." But actually, their counterparts, the men who've applied for those roles, probably are in a similar situation. So I think it's that ability to be bolder and to go. I'm just going to do it. And some of these individuals that you're referencing have probably taken that stance and go, I'm just going to do it.
So what about, I want to reshift a little bit the focus
Mm,
again to boards because I know that a big part of what you do is recruiting for
mm.
boards as well. And that's again another place where we're not seeing the same level of representation from women. So again, maybe some thoughts around why that is and how companies could be addressing that if they want to.
I think it's got to start with commitment from the top. And look at this in a more lateral fashion. We need to think about the opportunity to bring in people perhaps who have complementary and transferable skills, um, as opposed to exact skills. And I've definitely seen it. And I was talking to somebody, a woman who's on a board. She's just actually been appointed to a board recently, and her skill set is quite removed from the nature of what the business is. But actually, they saw something in her from from a personal perspective, from an ambition and drive perspective that could really help change the narrative within the board conversation. And at the end of the day, if you're looking for a board position, it's important to get yourself in front of people. Networking is critical. So build your brand, meet with people, connect, and be involved in conversations so that you kind of having your ear to the ground and you've got the opportunity to spot a potential situation when it arises.
I was literally chatting to a friend again on the weekend who's thinking of going for what they usually call a portfolio career, which has become very popular at the moment, which is great that women are finding these
Mm.
opportunities. So what is the likelihood that, let's say, you working on a role to fill on a board, that you're going to call a specific candidate? Are there things that you can do to make sure, one, that you get the call, or is it already about networking, as you mentioned, just to make sure that you probably find out about the role before it even goes to the
Mm.
recruiter?
Yeah, I think there is a big part of that. So I would suggest making it known, for example, in your CV, in things like LinkedIn profiles, that it's an area that you're looking to build. By doing that, I think it definitely opens up the possibilities in the conversation. But there's gonna be nothing better than you making sure that you are, exactly as you said, aware of who's doing what in the market, talking to people, because people know people, and word will get around. Talk to contact of contact, and if you really want to put yourself out there, that is going to pay dividends by having those various conversations.
Yeah, and how do you usually go about actually finding the right people, be they women or men or whoever it may be? I mean, do you have like a roster of people, or do you go and start looking people that, as you said, maybe are not even thinking about it and trying to convince them to think? How does it actually, where does one even start?
It all starts with the conversation with the client or the business and scoping out what it is that this role, first of all, is critical need, but also how do we expand the parameters in order to open up the talent pool? How do we do that? And then we go, right, so typically you would have hired this person from, I don't know, call it a consulting background. Where else can we look? What else can we do to expand the talent pool? And I found this conversation ensues a lot within the tech space because everyone still thinks there aren't any women in technology, and actually there's many, many, many talented women in technology. So where else do we go? So that's the first step. That the onus is on me to do that. Get commitment and buy-in from the hiring individual, the board, whoever it is that is responsible. And then part of my job is to then go out and look at that lateral marketplace and yes, approach people who may not have been thinking about leaving or didn't think they were ready to move. I moved a lady not so long ago. She had been in her current role for 20 years. And when I said to the client, is this individual who's been in a role for 20, oh no, she'll never move. And I went, well, don't take that as being, 100%. I'll have the conversation. And actually, she said to me, she was starting to get itchy. She was at a point in her career where she thought, I could probably still stay here and retire. Absolutely. She wasn't unhappy, but she thought to herself quietly, and she didn't say this to anyone, I've got one big thing left in me before I actually stop working. And she said, the timing of your call was actually so fortuitous that it was definitely in the back of my mind, something I probably wouldn't have acted on. And I managed to then get her in front of the business.
Yeah. And when you mentioned the satisfaction that you got out of placing that lady that was just starting to think, and it was just like the perfect time. I mean, what are some of the other examples of great moments of, I suppose, satisfaction and joy and generally fulfillment that you can think of that you were really like, oh, I'm so glad this is my job and I helped somebody, which is what we kind of started the conversation with.
I was talking to one of the hiring partners about the technology senior person he wanted to hire. And I said to him, so what if we just went out, not excluding men, but we just went out and looked at who are just the women in this space and focused and prioritized on that as a first step. And he went, yeah, okay, I'm happy to give that a go. You'll never find anyone, it was that sort of.
Yeah, go waste your time kind of thing.
Yeah. So off we went and we did our research and came back. And actually we got him involved in probably 8 or 9 conversations with women for a sort of senior technology role. And he was so chuffed. He sort of said to me, I'm so pleased we did that. And actually as part of the pipeline, we were able to demonstrate just a little bit of, I'm just prepared to be patient and wait and let's see what we get. It certainly paid off. And so it just shows you, because if we'd gone and looked at the whole population of talent, there's a good chance that the men would have all responded first. They would have entered the pipeline, and you then start losing traction with some of the female candidates that potentially would have taken slightly longer to bubble up into the sort of shortlisting process. And it's accountability at the end of the day. He was prepared to take accountability and stand by what we had agreed and what he believed was the right thing to do in that particular instance.
Yeah, and I'm thinking now when I've been involved in recruitment and certainly I'm sure others out there are doing it as well. There's always the impulse to do it quickly because somebody's left, or you're trying to fill the role as quickly as possible because it's a gap. You need someone to hit the ground running. But it sounds like sometimes that might work out, in the favor of male candidates because they're quicker to apply, they're applying bigger numbers, they're more willing to put themselves out there. So I guess to rephrase that, then maybe employers should be more patient, but what should candidates and female candidates be thinking about to make sure that they're not missing out? Because it sounds like they're missing out. Sometimes you snooze, you lose by the sounds of it.
Yeah, in terms of what female candidates can do, I would say maybe just think about your career sort of, more slightly more proactively, and have conversations with people like us. Because there definitely is opportunities that unfold on a consistent basis. And even if you're not specifically applying, I think the process of going through that conversation, that investigation, you just never know what's out there. So I would certainly keep an eye on what the market's doing, who's advertising.
Is it worthwhile doing that even if you're not quite sure what you want yet? Or because I think some of us, and maybe where most of us, again, I'm talking about women, but who knows, maybe men do the same thing. It's just, oh, I'm not quite sure yet. I haven't exactly figured it out. I don't have 100% certainty that's for me. So maybe I'm not going to contact that person until I know, because I don't want to waste their time. And, what do you think about that?
I think there's no harm in having a conversation, and often that helps to crystallize thinking. So you might be perhaps thinking about a change, or perhaps thinking about working for a different type of organization. By having the conversation, you can check that with people who are in the market, dealing with these types of organizations. And either it enables a conversation, or it might mean that perhaps what you've heard gives you the idea that it's not going to be the right thing for you. So you can then sort of shut that door and think about what else. It's always good to have a coach. In addition to this, there's always people who've been there and done it. I would highly suggest having somebody who is a sounding board who you could go to as a coach to test some of this thinking. It might spark different thoughts and ideas.
Oh yes. I'm a big fan in coaching, mentoring, and I only wish I had discovered that earlier. And I think that the next generation of women coming through, and generally everyone is a lot more open to that. The Gen Zs, they're probably a bit more aware of those options than I was. Or certainly I've had many reaching out to me, and I'm always happy to help if I can. Yeah, so now we're coming close to the end of our recording, but there's one question that I really wanted to ask you, because we talk about D&I from your perspective, but you are also a woman, and you've been in the industry for more than 20 years across 2 continents. And I wonder if sometimes you've had your own experiences kind of dealing, especially maybe when you were starting out with some of these stereotypes in the industry.
It's interesting. Just as you said, that reminds me of a meeting I had with the board of a big insurer. It was my earlier days of starting out in exec recruitment. And it was a boardroom full of men. And I walked in and I sat down, and we were talking about the recruitment aspects of what they were needing to do with their business. And then they said to me, "So Gail, what do you think?" And I was taken a bit off guard, because nobody's actually asked me for what I think before. And it was great, but it was daunting at the same time, because they wanted me to share my view of what I was hearing, seeing in the market, giving them advice and guidance about some of the aspects they were discussing. And I kind of, there was a real lesson for me to make sure that I was prepared. I've done my homework. I had data. I had evidence to be able to back up what I was saying. I felt wholly unprepared. In addition to that, I think it's quite a good idea to have discussions with the individual board members separately, so that you kind of understand each of them as people and the context of where they're coming from. Because then as a collective, it's not so scary. And you've actually had the opportunity to build relationships individually with them. And I proceeded to do that in the upcoming years of when I was then working with other boards, which proved very, very successful.
Yeah, we always come back to people and relationships, regardless of who's my guest and what we're talking about, and we always give each other tips. And I think that's why I'm very glad that you shared that story, because there's something about vulnerability and maybe showing, that it's okay, and someone who's listening is recognizing themselves and saying, yeah, you know what, that's fine. And hopefully they've been encouraged by listening to you to put themselves forward a little bit more, which I know we're starting to do. I always like to end with a question about your own career and experience and thinking forwards, where do you ideally hope that your career journey is going to take you, and what do you hope you might be?
So through my experience with the organizations I've worked with, there's a number of practical things, but there's probably 8 things that I'd love to be able to say where I was able to help business do that. The first thing is to see some of the metrics that businesses set about actually achieve. I mean, typically we're seeing, percentages like 10 to 12% of women in leadership roles, and that should be closer to 50. I'd love to be able to be part of that journey. If I could say I've managed to in some way help move those things upwards, making sure that businesses understand they need to include women as part of the interviewing and decision-making process, that it shouldn't just be left up to men. The inclusion of women as part of the executive panel, because it creates balance. So I'd love to be able to say I've managed to do that. Tracking of diversity, I think that's really important. That kind of policy around holding out for women in terms of a pipeline, the research and getting enough women into the shortlist phase. And then the other last thing is, one of the important things I think is to have a female mentor as part of the recruitment process, and not the decision making, but somebody outside of that decision making to be the sounding board, someone in the organization who the candidate can go to check, to debrief, to understand nuances, to get context as part of the process. I think would be really helpful. I do that as part of my role, but I think it's also important that organizations are doing that. So I think if those things start actively happening as part of the work I'm doing now, there would be, I could hang my boots up and say I feel like I've actually made a practical contribution to organizations to start recognizing the value that having more women in senior positions. So I'm not ready to stop working at all, but lots of energy and passion for this.
We need you. We need you to keep going for on behalf of all of us. And the reality is, look, I think when we talk about diversity today, we focus a bit more on gender diversity, but we know that diversity means so much more than that. So
groups.
We've only opened a little bit of the whole range of things that could mean, and that's certainly that we can hold for another conversation. But look, I think that I love practical tips. This is what this is all about, and you've been fantastic giving some of those ideas, and certainly even for me, making me think about the idea about having the independent point of contact in the firm, someone who's not directly involved in recruitment. I mean, that's just whether it's women or just in general. I think that's such a good idea, and I've never experienced that myself, but I can think how that could actually help everyone get a much more positive experience out of the whole process.
I've got many more ideas, but those are probably the top ones.
Oh, well, you know what? Maybe after we record this episode, we'll save a little bit so that people have a reason to get in touch, right?
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. This is a great opportunity just to further enhance the topic, and I could talk all day long.
Thank you so much, Gail. I enjoy that too. I think it's a very important topic, and I can't wait to see how our listeners will respond. So here we are. It's the beginning of the new year. We're sitting here making our traditional New Year's resolutions, and I really wanted to share something very practical, something that helps you start the year on the best possible foot. And speaking of this, I think that there are 3 or 4 main points from the interview with Gail that really stood out for me that I wanted to share with you and encourage you to think about those points, whether you are on the other end of the table hiring or whether you're someone who's looking to make career change as the new year approaches. The first thing that really grabbed me from Gail's story was the power of mentorship. And I know she emphasized a few times in the story about how this is a critical tool for career growth, both for mentees and mentors. And this made me reflect on how mentorship has shaped my own journey. So I really wanted to encourage you to seek and to offer guidance. And I'll be sharing some tips on how to do that in my Instagram channel. So make sure to check it out. The other point that really stuck with me was all about breaking the career narratives, and it was very important for me to hear about Gail's work in the return to work space. And I think that's something that's so often overlooked and even seen as perhaps charity, or let's just do that because it sounds nice and we can put it in our glossy brochures. But the reality is that people who return after long career breaks can offer so much. And I love Gail's story, which highlighted how some skills from personal life, like caregiving, can actually add value in a professional context. So I really wanted to use this to encourage you whenever you are part of a hiring process to be open-minded and think beyond the standard checklist for what you expect this candidate to demonstrate, and most importantly, how you expect to demonstrate those skills. And finally, my favorite point, and I'm all about networking with purpose, it was Gail's conversation on the importance of building relationships and staying proactive in career planning. I've kept on saying it, and I'll say it again, that nobody else is responsible for your own career development. You are in charge. You may recall our very first episode with Anita Rose, who said, take the wheel. You should be in charge of your own decision making. And if you outsource that to someone else, don't be surprised if that doesn't work out. So I love Gail's tips on how to make meaningful connections, especially for women aiming for leadership roles. And it seems to me that the main message is that it is a long game in recruitment. So perhaps this is one thing that we can promise each other, including me, to not shy away from opportunities that feel right, to meet new people, and to remember that whilst you might not necessarily immediately identify a career opportunity, those relationships will pay off in the long run. And as we finish this episode and step away back into the day, I wanted to share a little reminder that change begins with small individual actions. And I wanted to encourage you to identify one small tangible step that you can take today to promote diversity in your own environment, be that at work or somewhere else in the community. Next time on the show, we're continuing with the important topic of diversity with Liz Gebhardt, former head of diversity at Amazon, who shares her fascinating story of how she got to the top and what that cost her. So make sure you listen to the new episode in exactly 2 weeks. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Sound of Breaking Glass. I truly appreciate you being here with me. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss on any new episodes. They drop every 2 weeks. I'd also love for you to join me over on Instagram or LinkedIn, where I share more behind-the-scenes moments, guest insights, and extra resources just for our amazing Breakers community. Let's keep the conversation going, and I can't wait to connect with you there. Until next time, take care and keep breaking through.